Hi guys, today we are going to be at home and we're going to be watching a video of us just graphing things with inputs and outputs and seeing if we notice anything like slope or rate of change. So hopefully when we talk about proportional and non-proportional, we can start understanding the parts of it. So if you were at school yesterday, you got this paper. Okay, so you can go ahead and get that paper out because I'm going to give you answers, so you might as well write it down. If you do not have that paper, or you were not at school yesterday, there is on Google Classroom a Google slide that is the same exact thing, just digital in a Google slide. So you'll either do it on the paper and turn it in the next time I see you, or you'll just turn it on the Google slide. You don't have to do both. You just have to pick which one you would rather do. I would just do the paper because if this is an Edpuzzle, it'll pause every time you go onto it. So if you have it on paper, I would prefer to probably do it that way. Okay, so we are basically going to talk about inputs and outputs and then see if we can graph these informations and then hopefully find the slope. Okay, so this first equation, we have y equals 2x minus 3. So I have created all of these inputs for you, and so we are going to do 6 math problems to calculate what the output would be. Okay, so the first thing is we have to actually calculate that. So the first input we're going to put into this problem is -2. So this is where my x is in my table. So I'm going to replace this x with -2. So y equals 2. And now instead of x, I'm going to write the number -2. Okay. Then I just have to remember order of operations. I need to multiply. 2 times -2 is -4. And -4 minus 3 would be -7. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same exact thing, but now instead of having an input of x or an input of -2, this time I'm going to input -1. Okay. So then we are just going to calculate 2 times -1, which is -2. -2 minus 3 is -5. So now we're going to do the same exact thing. This gets kind of redundant, but that is totally okay. We're not going to do this every single time. I'm going to write out all the math problems that we're going to do. And then we can just input them all. So next one we have is 0, my favorite number. 2 times 0 is 0, and 0 minus 3 is -3. Okay. Then we'll put in a 1. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 minus 3 is -1. Now we're going to put in a 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 3 is 1. Then the last one, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 minus 3 is 3. So basically we had 6 inputs and we put it into this equation to figure out what our output would be. All right, so now we can plot these on a coordinate plane. So if we have an input of -2, this is my x-axis. So here's my input of -2. I get an output of -7. Okay, so here's -6. -7 really isn't on this graph, but I'm just going to use my imagination. Okay. Next, we put in -1, and we got out an output of -5. Then we put in an input of 0 and got an output of -3. Again, these are just like ordered pairs, so we could just plot these ordered pairs. Then we put an input of 1, we got an output of -1. Then we got an input of 2, we got out a +1. And then finally, we put in a 3 and we got out a 3. Okay, so I notice that it creates a straight line. Okay, I'm going to just put arrows on both sides just to say, hey, they keep going. Okay, so we create our table of values, we create our graph, and then it's asking what the slope or the rate of change is. So I'm going to show you guys again both ways, whichever you prefer. You don't have to do it both ways every time. Okay, so if you like the table way, you just have to find the change in the change. Okay, so how are our y values? I'm going to pick, I don't want to deal with negatives if I don't have to, so I'm going to pick these ones. Okay, how do I go from 1 to 3? I go up by 2s. Okay, and then how do I go from 2 to 3? It looks like I go up by 1s. So the change in my y's is 2. The change in my x's is 1. Okay. If you don't like the table way, maybe you like a graph, and since we graphed it, we might as well use it as well. Pick 2 good points. So I'm going to pick this one and this one since they're close together. Okay. It looks like I have to rise up 2 and run 1, which is equivalent to what the table showed us, a slope of 2 to 1. Okay. You could also just write it as 2. All right, we're going to do one more together, and then you guys are going to practice. Okay. Y equals negative 1x plus 1. Okay, so we are going to put in all of these values and see what our output is to plot some points. Okay, so y equals negative 1 plus 1. So the first thing I'm going to put in is negative 2. Okay. Negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2, and positive 2 plus 1 is 3. So my output is 3. All right, now I'm going to put in negative 1. Okay, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. 1 plus 1, I'm just dropping that down, I get 2. So when I put in a negative 1, my output is 2. Oh. Okay. Alrighty. Now we're going to put in a 0. Negative 1 times 0 is 0. Drop down the plus 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. Okay. Now we're going to put an input of a 1 in. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Okay. Now we're going to put in 2. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Drop down the plus 1. Negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. All right. And then the last one is we're putting in a 3. Negative 1 times 3, is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Okay, so this is the same exact equation. Basically, I just erased the input every single time. But if you're obviously doing it on paper, you would just write a different input every time. Okay. All right, so now we are ready to graph this equation. Negative 2, 3. So our x is negative 2. Our y is positive 3. Input x, output y. Input a negative 1, output of positive 2. Okay. 0, 1. 1, 0, 2, negative 1, and 3, negative 2. Okay, so then I'm going to connect this with a line because I could have given you different inputs, and so they would continue both directions. And the final thing it says is to find the slope or the rate of change. Again, you could do it from the table or the graph. I'll show you guys both ways. Okay. So you can pick any ones that you want. I'm going to pick these two because, hey, no negative numbers. So I like that. Okay. How do you go from 1 to 0? You go down 1. Okay. So I go down 1. How do I go from 0 to 1? I go up 1. So the slope is negative 1 to 1. Okay. If you like graphs more, pick 2 good points. Does not matter. Okay. And then rise and run. I have to go down 1, right 1. So I still get the same exact slope. Negative 1 to 1 could be simplified as just negative 1. Okay. So what your assignment is for today is to do the same exact thing for these other 6 equations. Okay, so you'll graph them. You have inputs and outputs, you'll graph them, and then you will find the slope. Then at the very end, there are 2 questions. It is okay if you get it wrong. I just want you guys to try it because this is what the new content of 8th grade math is. What part of the equation relates to the y-intercept or the starting point? So we're reviewing what we did in class yesterday with our graphing illustrations problem. And then what part of the equation relates to the slope of the line. So I want you guys just to try that. Again, if you're on the Google slide, you will have to click and type all of your inputs and outputs in. You will have to click and drag, and you will have to type it as well. Then you'll have to create that line. And then the very last question is just a click and type. Okay. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow.